As the co-chair of the Solomon B. Freehof Book and Author Series, and on behalf of my other co-chairs, Goldie Katz and Ellen Primus, I want to welcome everyone to our 85th year. This year, we are devoting this series to the memory and honoring Violet Marcus. Okay. Violet was an exceptionally vibrant and wonderful member of the Women of Rosh Sholem in our congregation. She was a friend who touched many of our lives by her strength, kindness, and love. We are pleased that members of her family have joined us. Violet expertly chaired this committee for 20 years. Because of the way she touched our lives, all of our reviewers this year were so happy to be a part of this, our 85th year of the series. I want to especially thank our Women of Rosh Sholem program chair, Andy Kaufman, for making these Zoom reviews a reality. Without her Zoom expertise, our committee could not have been able to bring you these book reviews this year. Thanks so much, Andy. And now I would like to call on Shelley Suffren, our Women of Rosh Sholem Special Projects Advisor, to our president, Terry Sterrett. Shelley?
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce Rabbi Jacob this evening. Please let him know that I have a few minutes in front of this, so if he wants to sit down and wait for it, that would be fine too. The introduction for Rabbi Jacob's review today of Brian Stelter's instant New York Times bestseller, Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth will not be a traditional introduction. The challenge of creating a welcoming segue for Dr. Jacob's review became no clearer after a Talmudic scholar quietly quipped to me, Walter Jacob needs no introduction. Pondering the question further prompted another question. In 60 seconds, how does one present the Jewish scholar of this international renowned status to an audience that has flourished under his spiritual guidance for over 60 years, while at the same time memorialize a larger than life matriarch to 4 generations for whom this book review series honors? And all this as we adroitly remember this event's namesake, one of America's most distinguished, influential, and beloved rabbis. Well, here's how. Today we remember Rabbi Solomon Freehof and Violet Marcus. In a few minutes, we will welcome Rabbi Jacob. It should be said, today's program and Rabbi Jacob's timely review comes during a most difficult time, one not previously seen in any of our lifetimes. We cannot forget those we've lost since March of 2019 and must continue to rely on our faith in each other to get through these times. So today I invite you to see Violet and Dr. Jacob through 4 unique traits I believe have fueled and anchored these productive and fulfilled lives. The 4 traits include being self-motivated to search for higher truth, using language to connect the past with the present and the present with the future, satisfying an endless thirst for knowledge as a lifelong learner, and practicing empathy in the study of human behavior. In remembering Violet, her thoughts were never far from the family, past or present. We spent many times at temple and at her apartment sharing family stories and how they influenced our daily lives. She was deeply intelligent with a wicked sense of sarcasm. Her calendar was always bustling over the years, raising her sons, helping with the family dry cleaning company, working at the EEOC, surviving cancer, volunteering, attending cultural events, lunch with friends, or attending programs and services at temple. Jewish learning was rooted early on. It was such a priority that she affiliated the family in 4 congregations and 2 states to assure her family could experience every Judaic learning opportunity available. As senior rabbi, Dr. Jacob was never far from his congregants, whether in Munich blessing every rabbinic graduate at Abraham Geiger College, or helping Irene plan the next biblical botanical garden theme. He is a master of time management, with a short list of tips on how to get it all done, like attending every event, researching every query, writing and editing multiple responsa every month, visiting the sick, preparing weekly sermons, presenting an award to German Chancellor Merkel, managing CCASR responsa committees, and studying biblical archaeology, to name a few. In this online newsletter, Everybody Gardens, Doug Oster wrote of Rabbi Jacob's lighter side at age 87. The sense of humor the rabbi's wife fell in love with, an impish grin when he finishes a story, are still there. It's accompanied by a twinkle in his eye as he reminisces about building the biblical botanical garden. His vast areas of expertise, numerous languages, and dozens of interests make him positioned to be a change agent, even when change seems as rare as a shooting star. Violet, the consummate lady, dressed to the nines on the outside, ready to field any challenge that came her way. There were no surprises with Vi. One always knew where she stood on any given issue. Violet loved acting and interacting. She had natural stage presence. Both are lifelong learners. They enjoyed a friendship shared by few. Though she was boisterous and animated, and he measured and steady, each was blessed with endless energy, defiant determination, and a strong work ethic. In 17th Generation, the life work of Rabbi Walter Jacob, author Eric Lidgy reveals a higher calling that is uniquely Walter Jacob. Lidgy writes that it is not just the search for truth through understanding halacha, Jewish law, that drives Rabbi Jacob, but it is often understanding human behavior over time, especially in the face of adversity. And this, he believes, is where the authentic truth lies. So whether it's from writing hundreds of responsa to the 47 books he's published or his 90 amazing years, he has navigated every question and conflict, from addiction, minority and immigration discrimination, to gay rights, poverty, sexual abuse, and mixed marriages. He's regularly asked even to define the answer to what is a Jew. One cannot estimate his humble and unassuming demeanor. Rabbi Walter Jacob is a force to be reckoned with. And if anyone can find truth and guide us through this rhetorical minefield of fake news in CNN's chief media correspondent Brian Stelter's book, Hoax, it will be Rabbi Walter Jacob. Rabbi, welcome.
Michael, you need to unmute Dr. Jacob.
He's unmuted.
Good evening. It's good to be together with you and to continue this long tradition of book reviews. And of course, I need to thank, first of all, the people who were involved in this, Terry and Shelley. A lot of work involved in preparing each of these and getting them going. And it's hard not to think of the many hours spent on this. And of course, Violet Marcus. We go back a long, long way, and I remember several occasions quite well. One of them had a lot of members of the board of the congregation at my garden, and we walked through it. She insisted on walking through it too, which really meant trying to make sure that she did not step into one of the streams in the garden, and the whole thing could have ended up in a huge disaster. I never, after that, invited anybody to come walk through the garden with me. To let them go on their own and let them fall on their own, and that would work out quite well. Well, we're here, of course, this evening to deal with a specific book, The Hoax. And that presented me with some unusual choices and some major difficulties. The book is okay. It's part of a series, more or less spawned by our current president, not of the congregation, but of the country. He had, as you know, and probably still has, the habit of firing people just on the spot. And I sometimes wonder if someone was placed in a position of some significance, if they didn't already have some words to say in case they were suddenly dismissed. Could have happened, didn't quite happen that way. But all those folks who were dropped, some suddenly, some after a bit of service, some after a bit of nonsense in which they participated. But all of those ended up with quite a number of people. There were probably more people in his cabinet, in his inner circle, than for any other president that one could name. My thought for a while was very simple, till I found out how many people were involved in this. After all, I thought The Hoax is a nice book, deals with some interesting matters. Why not combine those with others? Other people, other individuals who were equally involved in this and would present a kind of a different point of view. So I set myself on that road and soon found it was almost endless because everybody who was involved, suddenly dismissed, very quickly managed to write a book. I think most of them didn't write the books at all. They were ghostwritten, and possibly if someone was really bright and active, as soon as he heard of somebody being appointed to a position, got close enough to that person so that when he was suddenly dismissed, that man could step in and say, okay, I can write a biography of him. In fact, I already have half a biography written. Allow me to do it. And so these books soon piled up. And that brought me into a serious problem because I thought, okay, I would have the author of The Hoax and maybe one or two others, but that soon ended up with just one or two, but a whole dozen. Impossible. I didn't want to spend my life becoming an expert on the closing days of our current president. After all, that wasn't my interest at all. So what to do? Well, very simple. You have a topic that has been assigned to you, but you tell the people who were looking for a review of The Hoax, you're going to be disappointed in this. Yeah. We're going to go in a different direction. And you can't say that, but if you don't like it, there's an easy thing you can do about it. Switch the button on your television or your computer, and you will be okay. So my effort with this is really to look more deeply into these book reviews. It's kind of strange. After all, everybody, every good rabbi is constantly reading. But why haven't others done the same thing as Freehof did? Create a really interesting book review series and move it along. Why, I think, is mainly because of the unusual skills that Freehof brought to this. He not only enjoyed reading the books and reviewing them in his own mind, but also making this a major part of his rabbinate. And that's not as unusual as it sounds, because every one of us who is a rabbi is a book reviewer. We are asked to review a book every Shabbat, a section of a book. You don't have to read all of it, just read a couple of chapters. and comment on it and do that. That's after all the tasks that we have set for ourselves for hundreds or even a couple of thousand years. So quite a different way of looking at books. And we've done that together successfully and always had an interesting time doing it. It's of course not easy to continue this year after year. After all, there we are with an audience which is all of Judaism, and you're asked to say something new about a book which has been reviewed not once, but 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times. Now, what in the world are you going to say that's going to make any sense or go down any different road? Well, Freehof, Solomon B. Freehof, had the unusual ability to do that with a book that everybody, at least in theory, knew quite well. But he was going to do it with a modern book and succeeded amazingly. How did that work? How did that ever occur? Well, when he came to Road of Shalom from his congregation in Chicago, he had a few good book reviews which he had given there, but he tried here to see what happened here. And he found that the books that he chose to review really had a wonderful reception. And so he decided, after a few years here, that he would start a book review series, not on Shabbat morning and not even on Sunday morning, because he had those sermons to preach as well. But he wanted to do this to the broader audience. And so he decided that he would review, didn't know whether he would succeed, but he succeeded admirably. Because why? What did he do? What was his method of looking at books, which really made it interesting for people to come to a book review series? He had no idea how many people would actually show up, but found out that his reputation as a speaker was such that, okay, they came. And then he chose his books very, very carefully, and there was some luck involved in that. When he thought about reviewing Gone with the Wind, which was a runaway bestseller, with everybody really turning to it, he decided, okay, I will review that book. And he reviewed it in a wonderful way, which amazingly enough got people who had never been in a synagogue, never attended a book review of any kind, to go to it. So very soon after announcing a book review series, he found this vast auditorium which seats 1,500 people, completely full. And all of them listening to what he had to say, how he had able to interpret this book. That's very different from interpreting a Torah portion to your congregation. The material is so different. The ability to create something out of it is so different. And that was his success. What he didn't realize is that success, because they came, filled the auditorium, And the next week, he announced a different book, filled the auditorium again, and the week after that, for 5 or 6 weeks. Now, of course, the problem was that he had a lion by the tail, because he had to find books which would enthrall people and which were bestsellers, but which were not too sexy, which were not too mysterious, so that he suddenly found himself trying to interpret something which one really couldn't interpret from a religious point of view. But he managed that. And all through the years, I watched him and followed him. He would, of course, after it became known that people came by the thousands to listen to such a book review, the booksellers were interested as well. Good heavens, where else do we have an audience all seated in one place who may be able to buy 1,500 copies of that book? Wow, they loved that. But he had the choice of seeing to it that wasn't easy, that this really continued to succeed with the booksellers. And so through the years, he spent an inordinate amount of time looking for books that sold well, but had at least a moral or ethical imperative implied in it, even if it wasn't, it didn't hit you over the head. So he spent many, many hours in that. And as I knew him for perhaps 60 years, I could see that each season he was looking for something different, something that would not only interest the people, but also enable him to create a moral pattern out of it, something that would be useful in their lives. That, of course, is never easy. And in the course of things, he, of course, was always enticed or enabled to be enticed, or at least people, the booksellers tried to entice him to pick their book. And so they would come to his office with a whole stack of books. Most of his he would quickly discard, but some, yes, it would be okay. Actually, I had something slightly similar to that happen in my life. My late father was a rabbi, but also a professor of history at a university in Missouri, Drury University. So what did that mean? It meant that at that university, at the end of the Second World War, all of the other professors were gone. They'd all been drafted into the military. So there were only 3 of them to take on the entire world and to discuss the entire world, which meant that booksellers from almost any field of history, whether it was Chinese history or English history or American history, would show up there. And he, of course, didn't want to spend a lot of time with those folks. So he just said, deposit your books here, and I'll let you know whether we choose your book or another person's book for the next course that I'm going to offer, which is medieval European history. I turned out to be the chief benefactor of that, because all of those books were then available to me. I could choose whatever I wanted. There was a downside to that too, because the president of the college said to the 3 history professors which were there, look, I enjoy American history. I'm going to teach American history. The 2 of you have the rest of the world, and you can divide it however you wish, which was quite a task. But it also meant for me, as I went to that school and liked history, I couldn't take any history courses, because after all, my father was the professor of most of those. So I liked history, enjoyed reading the books of history, but could only do that history through reading. So what happened, of course, was that as time went on, we got other professors, but that didn't, by that time I was through with college, so I never took a history course. Interestingly enough, as one looks back, as I look back at that, and as I look back at what was done with history in these years, is that an enormous amount of material was presented in very, very different and distinctive ways. It was interesting for me as a college student, and even before that a little bit, to try to understand history, Jewish history, from different perspectives. And certainly as one thinks about the Freehof lectures, one has to remember that he, in his lectures, really wandered through the whole gamut, not only of history, but also of literature. He saw it as his task to try to educate the audience that he had in those varying, varying fields, and to wander from one to the other. And as you look at his book reviews in retrospect, you'll see that some dealt with Europe, some dealt with Asia, some dealt with no country at all, but only dealt with a philosophical way of looking at the world. So he felt that it was his duty to do that to at least some extent, and to educate the people that had come to be entertained, but he felt it was his duty to bring them to a different level and to take them where they were and move them onward. Who were the people in his audience? These individuals were just ordinary women who were intellectual, some of them, yes, many of them not particularly. And now they were in this hall every week, listening to a rabbi, talking to them about a book, but looked at this from the other perspective. What was the rabbi's perspective of this? The rabbi's perspective was very simple. He had seen to it that hundreds of individuals who normally would have had not the slightest interest in Jewish history or in history generally was suddenly embarked on a course in history, whatever the title of the book was, and taken into a totally different world, not only with the book, but also with the place. How many of these people had ever been in a synagogue? Here they were in this lovely, enormous synagogue, and were given an introduction to Judaism, not through the speech held by the rabbi, but just through the setting. It meant that thousands of individuals through the years were enticed, you might say, to go to a synagogue who would otherwise never have even bothered to enter it. And you might say, well, doesn't that building entice you? I doubt it. We have hundreds of students who live 2 or 3 blocks from here, who walk by this synagogue every day on the way to class. And if you stopped them suddenly and said, what is that building over there? Some might actually be able to say, that's a synagogue. But most of them would say, what building are you talking about? They've walked by it hundreds of times, never entered it. But in this case, what Freehof was able to do was get these individuals to come to a synagogue, to listen to a rabbi, and simply in that way to expand their knowledge and their range of interest in Judaism. It was a phenomenon that was unusual, and one which, of course, many rabbis tried to imitate. But they found out that that wasn't so easy, because he had an unusual speaking ability, an ability to organize something and present it without it being apparent that they were being enticed into a different field. And although hundreds tried, and tried also in that way, of course, to provide their own take on a book review lecture, none of it worked. That was something that really was part of Freehof's innate ability to deal with topics and to deal with them continually, week after week, and year after year, and to have each time at least this room full, occasionally could be more than that, so that there was an overflow in another auditorium of people that for whom there just wasn't enough seating capacity here. So what Freehof did with that series, which continued every year, every autumn, and in a minor way through a Bible class in spring, truly an unusual phenomenon of interfaith activity. Of course, what continued to happen was afterwards, people would call up or write and say, you know, that was terrific. Could you come to our assembly or our church and deliver the same sort of thing? And he, of course, said, well, you know, I really don't have time for that. But I have an assistant rabbi, and you'll have to take him. So that introduced me as a young rabbi to hundreds of ministers and hundreds of churches over the decades, and was for me an interesting education in what different denominations are like, and in many instances, that was an education which came rather abruptly. For example, I remember early on, I was still very young. That may be difficult for you to imagine that was really true once also, and gave a talk, started to give a talk, and I was accustomed to occasionally somebody interrupting the talk, but I hadn't gotten even 5 minutes into the talk, and these folks in that church started clapping. I wondered what happened. Did suddenly somebody appear that I'm unaware of? No, in that church, it was customary for the congregation to let you know how they felt about what you said. And so there, I was trying to speak. These people were trying to clap. And I was saying to myself, now what? Do I end at this point? I've only spoken for 5 minutes. I don't think that's enough. So I kept going and found out that that was their way of not only appreciating, but also of letting you know that you were still with them. Should we have introduced that to our congregation? I don't know. I never tried, but it certainly was tempting to attempt at least once, but it wouldn't work. So these book reviews introduced Freehof to the entire city and beyond that. And people really flocked every year, different topics, but always presented in a fascinating way. So we can see that this man really was a phenomenon all of his own, not to be replicated at all, and certainly not easily. And what that, of course, meant for me, that as I succeeded him, I said to myself, what in the world are you going to do? Are you going to try to present book reviews? And so the first thing that I more or less canceled, I've forgotten how I got away with that, but I did, and said, book reviews, we'd better think of the past and think of something else. But we did continue with the book reviews, myself giving only one and letting other rabbis play with that also. But it wasn't the same as with Freehof, because he had that unusual knack of being able to stand in the pulpit, take off his glasses, and start talking. And it was wonderful. So we remember the lectures that were given in those years, and we remember what he tried to do with them, to educate not Jews in this case, but people, Jews and non-Jews, in a moral way and to lead us in a different direction. That's what we should always remember from Solomon B. Freehof's book review series. Now, as far as the hoax is concerned, I leave the hoax to you. I thank you for coming, and come again as other people will deal with book reviews. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, you're muted.
If anybody has questions, you could put them in the chat or you could unmute yourself to ask them.
Am I unmuted? I think
Yes,
I'm
you are,
unmuted.
Terry.
I want to thank Rabbi Jacob so much for his wonderful reminiscence of Dr. Freehof, as only he can do, because he was with him at the time, and about his reminiscence of himself and about the book also. But thank you so much, Rabbi Freehof. Yeah, does
Thank you
anyone have any,
Jacob.
I mean, Rabbi Jacob, sorry. Does anyone have any questions? I can't, can we see the whole thing? I can't see it here if anybody's.
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you, thank you so much, Rabbi Jacob. That was wonderful. And I want to thank Karen Breen for making it possible for Rabbi Jacob to speak from the pulpit, which was wonderful. Thank you. And
We should thank Rabbi Bisno and his boys who are doing all the tech from the sanctuary.
right. Thank you, Rabbi Bisno. Also, this is wonderful. But it was wonderful to hear you reminisce, Rabbi Jacob, because they're telling us about our history again. And would anyone like to stay and visit afterwards? I know Violet's family is on, some of Violet's family. Well, I'm going to stay after for a minute and visit. But you want to, Harold?
Hi. You know, every week that we've been on, it just, you know, it's so moving to us that Mom was so beloved by the congregation, and I know it was her heart and soul. She put everything into it, and we feel like it's our home too because it was her home. And you know, every time we're there, of course, everyone is so welcoming and so reminiscent about all that Mom had done in all of her years at the congregation. And I wonder if in the archives there's anything from the early days, like the temple players or those kinds of things. I would love to be able to see if there's any, you know, anything back from those days in the archives.
Martha, are there any? Martha's on here.
Yes, I do have photographs from most of the 10 Players productions, and I have a lot of scripts. And your mother gave me a few things from her personal collection also. Yeah.
Cause I even think she dragged my dad into a couple of those shows.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, although our dad, you know, everyone knows that Vi was a dramat. But my dad, in his own right, he and his brother in their younger days tap danced professionally. So he would grab him anytime there was a dance number, and whether it's 10 Players or PTA or whatever. So I don't know if everybody realizes that my grandfather, my great-grandfather, was one of the founders of Beth Abraham, which was a very, you know, traditionally Orthodox congregation. My grandfather, at the age of 18, left his father's Orthodox shul to join Rosh Sholem. And that's how long my family has been associated with Rosh Sholem, because my dad and his brothers and sister were raised at Rosh Sholem. And so they, you know, I guess my grandfather must have been 18 years old somewhere around the beginning of the 1900s. So that's, you know, there's generations upon generations of the connection to Rosh Sholem. And most of you know that I'm connected to Temple Sinai, but I certainly feel that Rosh Sholem is home as well.
Oh, thank you, Harold. Yeah, and all of you, in 2 weeks, Rabbi Henry is going to be reviewing The Color of Love by Marra, which is a wonderful book, and on December 3rd, Thursday at 7:30. So I hope you can all join us then. Yeah. Hi, Chuck. Say hello to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacob.
And thank you, Dr. Jacob. This was wonderful. It was wonderful to see you behind the pulpit, in the pulpit again. And it's wonderful. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, how do I go out of this? Okay.
Down
Where's leave? Okay.
on the right.
How do I get everybody
Click
to
it.
leave? Okay. It's
No,
not
no,
working.
you didn't click leave.
I did click leave.
No, you didn't. You gotta click it right on it. Now it said leave
Okay.
me.